Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Here I am outside 16 Cumberland Terrace, London. And as you can see, it's a refulgent day, which is why the light is blinding, shining off this white stucco splendor. Anyway, this is where Mr. Simpson was living in 1936. Middle of 1936, Edward VIII, the king, gave her a large sum of money with which he was able to buy a place here. I'm not sure how much of it she owned. So that was that. And then she briefly went abroad to France in the autumn when she felt she was just getting too much stress, too much hassle. It was only on the 3rd of December 1936 when British newspapers started printing the story, Mrs. Simpson is having a relationship with the king, Mrs. Simpson is in the throes of a divorce, and the king wishes to marry her, and blah, blah, blah. And by then, really, the cat was out of the bag. Only a week later, on the 10th of December 1936, the King, Edward VIII, he abdicated. He signed the instrument of abdication, saying, I, Edward VIII, set forth by my own hand this instrument of abdication, giving his titles as King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Emperor of India, Defender of the Faith, and our realms and possessions beyond the seas. And I can't remember, I've obviously got those in the wrong order because the king bit has to be followed by and our realms and possessions beyond the seas. He didn't mention all the dominions. He was also King of Ireland, but he didn't mention that. Because, King of Ireland obviously only referred to 26 counties of Ireland. The rest, Northern Ireland's part of the UK. That was included in that title. Anyway, so Edward VIII, he then left the United Kingdom immediately, moved to France. He rented Chateau de la Croix, which is near Antibes, and he was renting that until the late 1940s. Obviously, from 1940 to 1945, he couldn't go there because the Germans were there. Anyway, so that's that, and I'm not sure when they sold it, but in May 1936, Mr. Simpson married Edward VIII in France. He was no longer Edward VIII. His younger brother became King George VI. King George VI granted his older brother the title Duke of Windsor. So the Duke of Windsor was no longer to be known as Edward VIII, but the Duke of Windsor. To avoid confusion, I sometimes call him Edward VIII well after 1936, after he abdicated the throne. So he and his wife, they were in the Bahamas from 1940 to 45. He was Governor General of the Bahamas, which he rather disliked. He said it was a very third-rate colony. Now, 90% of the population was black. There was a colour bar at the time, and the black community were largely just excluded from political power. They didn't have majority rule till the 60s, and the whites had most of the wealth. So he largely mingled with white society. He had some of the racial prejudices that were common at the time. So they made frequent shopping trips to Florida. The FBI followed them and took a most extraordinary interest in their activities. Were worried that they were pro-Nazi. They were friends with a very wealthy Swedish businessman who they FBI suspected of having links to the Third Reich, and that was that. Because at first, the United States was neutral, but leaning towards the Allies, and obviously from the 7th of December 1941, the United States was an Allied country. So that was that. 1945, his governorship came to an end, and obviously the Duchess of Windsor was very involved in that. There were obviously sorts of social functions where she had to play the hostess. She was there at the governor's mansion, and then they after 1945 they returned to France. They had Chateau de la Croix, and they also they purchased a house in Bois de Boulogne. Sorry, they rented it from the city of Paris. The city of Paris let them have it for a tiny rent, very generously. Edward VIII, he was allowed to buy things through the British Embassy tax-free. They also had a country estate not very far from Paris. So she said that she wasn't beautiful, the Duchess of Windsor, and indeed I don't think she was a especially good-looking woman. That there was all sorts of lurid and salacious tales have been told about her, because you can imagine her enemies were legion. A lot of people would like to marry the king. So whatever country's involved, you can see how this would happen. We don't like these foreign women coming over here stealing our best man, or vice versa. Or we wouldn't like these foreign men coming over here and poaching our best women, whatever it is. So there were all sorts of reasons why people thought that Mrs. Simpson was unsuitable to marry Edward VIII, because she was going through her second divorce. Even one divorce is unthinkable for most people. She was almost 40. That was considered much older then than it is now, because a lot of girls got married in their teens. Lifespan was shorter. She might be unable to have children. Through her 2 marriages, she hadn't had any children at all. And she wasn't a princess, obviously. She wasn't a noblewoman. She was American. She wouldn't understand how things are done. They didn't know about courtly etiquette, though she had been in the United Kingdom for about 10 years before she met Edward VIII. So I think this idea that she didn't know how to behave, I think that's overdone actually. And the other point is Edward VIII found her very fresh and challenging in a positive way, because the aristocratic women he was having affairs with were just in awe of his kingly status. Would be very deferential to him, but he didn't get any of that from Wallis Simpson. She was very forthright, opinionated, and he felt fun, chirpy. So there's no doubt he absolutely did love her, and they were completely faithful to each other for the rest of their lives. Beforehand, he'd had several mistresses, married women, and had some simultaneous relationships, two timing or more. And indeed, when he met Mrs. Simpson, he didn't stay monogamous to her. He had another mistress at the same time. It took him almost 3 years to make up his mind he wanted her and drop the other one. Okay, so that's that, and look what a place it is to live, just opposite Hyde Park. Neoclassical style, not Hyde Park, sorry, Regent's Park. And unfortunately, it's just so shiny, you can't probably see up there the, oh, maybe you can see now the statues, yeah. Inspired by ancient Greece. Are they supposed to be the muses? I'm not quite sure. Because I can see them with the naked eye, but on my screen it's just so bright you can't see anything. I'll tell you what, maybe I can turn down the brightness. Yeah, maybe that's better. Can you see them now a bit better? You can't see me so well, but it doesn't matter. Okay, that's enough about Mrs. Simpson.